December 22nd, 1944. 11,000 feet above the snow-covered Ardennes Forest, Belgium. First Lieutenant Jack Hammer Dalton tightened his grip on the control column of his P-47 Thunderbolt as the morning sun broke through scattered cloud cover. Below him, stretched across 3 kilometers of frozen farmland, sat the reason his squadron commander had explicitly forbidden what he was about to do. 12 German Panzer, 4 tanks advancing in hunting formation toward American positions. Their 75mm main guns sweeping methodically across the terrain. Between Dalton and those Panzers stood 18 months of official doctrine, 3 technical orders prohibiting extreme angle dive attacks, and the memory of 4 pilots who died testing those limits. The P-47 could carry 2,000 pounds of bombs. It could survive hits that would destroy any other fighter. Its Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine produced 2,800 horsepower. But there was one thing every Thunderbolt pilot had been told since training. Never dive vertically at targets below 3,000 feet. Never push past 550 miles per hour indicated. Never risk compressibility lockup at attack altitude. Dalton's altimeter read 11,000. His target, a panzer formation threatening to break through to Bastogne, sat at 800 feet elevation. That meant 10,200 feet of vertical space. At his current speed and angle, following approved doctrine would put him at 4,000 feet before bomb release. From 4,000 feet, hitting a moving 30-ton tank with unguided ordnance required luck more than skill. The Germans knew this. Their doctrine counted on it. American fighter bombers would attack from angles that gave the tanks time to scatter, time to reach cover, time to survive. Dalton rolled inverted, pulled back on the column, and pointed his P-47's nose straight down. What happened in the next 8 minutes would either validate 2 years of safety regulations or prove that survival sometimes requires breaking the rules designed to keep you alive. By December 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt had established itself as the workhorse of American tactical air power in Europe. Republic Aviation had delivered more than 15,000 examples of the type. The 9th Air Force operated 16 fighter-bomber groups, equipped with a massive 7-ton fighter. From D-Day through Christmas, P-47s had destroyed thousands of German vehicles, locomotives, and defensive positions. But the Thunderbolt effectiveness came with known limitations. Chief among them, dive bombing restrictions born from the same compressibility issues that had plagued the P-38 Lightning. The problem wasn't the bombs. The P-47D could carry a pair of 1,000-pound GP bombs, one under each wing, plus its 850 caliber Browning M2 machine guns loaded with 425 rounds per gun. 3,400 total rounds. Enough firepower to shred light armor and suppress defensive positions. The problem was physics. At high speeds, particularly in dives exceeding 500 miles per hour, the P-47 encountered the edge of compressibility. Shock waves formed over the wings. Control surfaces lost effectiveness. The stick froze. In extreme cases, the aircraft entered an uncontrollable descent that no amount of pilot input could reverse. Republic's chief test pilot, Lowry Brabham, had nearly died in November 1942 exploring the P-47's high-speed envelope. His Thunderbolt had exceeded 550 miles per hour in a dive from 40,000 feet. The controls locked solid. The trim tabs ceased functioning. Only his strength and the P-47's inherently stable airframe saved him. He'd pulled out at 8,000 feet with compression bruises across his torso from the G-forces. Following that incident, Republic issued Technical Order 01-11A1. Pilots are prohibited from exceeding 500 miles per hour indicated airspeed in any flight regime. Dive shall be initiated at angles not exceeding 60 degrees from horizontal. Recovery must begin no lower than 4,000 feet above target elevation. The order was distributed to every P-47 squadron. Flight instructors drilled it into student pilots. Squadron commanders enforced it. The message was clear. The P-47's advantage lay in its ruggedness, its firepower, and its ability to survive punishment, not in risky dive angles that could turn the aircraft into an uncontrolled ballistic projectile. But by late 1944, German tank crews had learned to exploit these restrictions. Captured Panzer crewmen interrogated after the Battle of Normandy revealed consistent patterns. American Jabaloni, they called the P-47s. Thunderjugs, powerful but predictable. A classified intelligence summary from 3rd Army G2, dated October 15, 1944, included testimony from an Oberfeldwebel commanding a Panzer IV captured near Metz. The American Thunderbolts attack from shallow angles. We see them coming from 4 kilometers distance. Driver increases speed. Commander orders smoke. We disperse. By the time their bombs release, we have moved. Their bomb craters miss by 50, 100 meters. Then they must climb away. We regroup and continue. The math was devastating. 9th Air Force records from July through November 1944 showed that P-47 dive bombing missions against German armor achieved an average hit rate of 7%. For every 100 bombs dropped on Panzer formations, 7 struck within lethal radius. 93 missed. The Germans weren't invincible. They were simply faster than American doctrine allowed pilots to counter. A Panzer IV could accelerate to 40 kilometers per hour on good roads. In the 45 seconds between AP-47 beginning its regulated dive from 4,000 feet and bomb release, a moving tank could displace more than 500 meters from its initial position. American pilots tried adaptations. Some flew lower approach patterns, sacrificing altitude advantage for surprise. German flak crews adjusted, concentrating fire at predictable altitudes. The 358th Fighter Group reported 7 P-47s lost to flak in a single week of November. Other pilots attempted coordinated attacks from multiple angles, hoping to saturate an area and catch tanks regardless of evasion. This required extensive radio coordination, burned more fuel, and still produced marginal results. The 362nd Fighter Group documented 11 separate missions against German armor in early December, where 0 confirmed tank kills were achieved despite dropping more than 200 bombs. The problem wasn't pilot skill. It wasn't equipment malfunction. It was doctrine. The regulations designed to protect P-47 pilots from compressibility were allowing German Panzers to survive American air superiority. Then came December 16, 1944, and everything changed. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Operation Wacht am Rhein. The Germans called it Watch on the Rhine. The Allies would call it the Battle of the Bulge. 28 divisions of the Wehrmacht, including 10 Panzer divisions, smashed into the Ardennes Forest. Their objective: reach Antwerp, split the Allied armies, force a negotiated peace. The spearhead was armor. Panzer IVs, Panthers, Tigers. 600 tanks concentrated on a 50-mile front. The weather conspired with German planning. Heavy overcast. Freezing fog. Snow. For 4 days, the 9th Air Force was grounded. P-47s sat idle on muddy forward airstrips while German columns advanced unchecked. By December 20th, the bulge in American lines extended 40 miles deep. Bastogne was surrounded. The 101st Airborne was cut off. Then, on December 21st, the weather broke. Patchy clouds at 3,000 feet. Visibility 5 miles. Not perfect flying weather, but flyable. General Pete Quesada, commanding 9 Tactical Air Command, issued immediate orders. Maximum effort against German armor. Every available P-47 would hit Panzer formations, threatening the American perimeter. First Lieutenant Jack Dalton received his briefing at 0600 hours, December 22nd, at Advanced Landing Ground in 92, Metz, France. His squadron, the 512th Fighter Squadron, 406 Fighter Group, would attack German armor reported moving west from Saint-Vith toward Bastogne. Dalton had joined the 406th in August 1944. 26 years old, from Abilene, Texas. He'd grown up working on farm equipment, understanding machines through feel as much as manuals. He'd earned his wings at Luke Field in Arizona, transitioned to P-47s at Republic's training facility in Evansville, Indiana, and arrived in Europe 3 months after D-Day. He'd flown 38 combat missions, mostly ground attack, some bomber escort. He destroyed 2 locomotives, damaged 6 trucks, and earned a reputation for bringing damaged aircraft home. Other pilots called him Hammer because of his aggressive strafing runs and because he'd once landed a P-47 with 3 cylinders blown off the engine. But Dalton had also grown frustrated. He'd watched bombs miss. He'd seen Panzers scatter and survive. He'd pulled out of dive-bombing runs at 4,000 feet, knowing the angle was wrong, the speed insufficient, the geometry impossible. He'd followed doctrine. The tanks kept advancing. On the evening of December 20th, while the weather was still socked in, Dalton had spent 3 hours in the operations shack studying dive-bombing mathematics. Velocity, angle of descent, time to target, bomb trajectory. The equations were straightforward. To hit a moving target, you needed speed and angle. More speed, steeper angle, less time for the target to evade. The problem was compressibility. At 550 miles per hour, the controls locked. But Republic's technical order didn't say the P-47 couldn't exceed 550. It said pilots were prohibited from exceeding it. The difference mattered. Dalton knew from squadron scuttlebutt that Colonel Arleigh Blood, now commanding the 405th Fighter Group, had been part of the team that explored P-47 compressibility limits back in 1943. Blood had reportedly told his pilots that the Thunderbolt could survive controlled compressibility if you understood the recovery procedure. Don't fight it. Don't try to use trim tabs. Wait for the controls to unlock as speed decreased. Pull smooth and steady when control returned. The technique wasn't official. It wasn't in any manual. But pilots talked. They shared what worked. Dalton had even practiced it once, rolling inverted at 30,000 feet and diving until his airspeed touched 540 before pulling out at 20,000. The controls had stiffened but never locked completely. He'd recovered with altitude to spare. Now, at 0600 on December 22nd, Dalton stood in front of the briefing board staring at reconnaissance photos of 12 Panzer IV tanks moving in formation. They were 5 kilometers from American positions. At their current pace, they'd reach artillery range by afternoon. The briefing officer, a weary-looking major, pointed at the photos. Your primary objective is to slow them down. Drop your ordnance, strafe if conditions allow, get home. The weather's marginal. Clouds ceiling at 3,000. Don't push it. Don't push it. Standard doctrine. Safe doctrine. Doctrine that let 12 Panzers keep rolling toward American lines. Dalton's hand went up. Sir, what's our bomb release altitude? 4,000 feet. Standard procedures. And if they scatter? Do your best, Lieutenant. That's all anyone can ask. Dalton nodded. Sat down. Stare at the photos. 12 tanks. How many American infantrymen would die if those tanks reached their positions? How many 75mm rounds would those main guns fire into foxholes and dugouts? He made his decision then. He wouldn't tell his wingman. Wouldn't argue with the briefing officer. He'd follow the formation to the target. He'd see the situation. And if the angle was wrong, if doctrine was failing again, he'd do what farm equipment mechanics did when a manual didn't match reality. He'd trust what he knew about machines and physics more than what someone in an office tower had written on paper. At 0715, 8P-47DS lifted off from A-92. Dalton flew position 3 in the lead flight. Each Thunderbolt carried 2,000-pound GP bombs and full ammunition. They climbed through thin cloud layers, breaking into clear sky at 7,000 feet. The morning sun glinted off frost-covered wings. Dalton's assigned aircraft was P-47D-28 RA, serial number 42-27412. The cowling bore the name Abilene Hammer, painted in white letters. Beneath it, 18 mission marks. Small bombs for ground attack sorties. Swastikas for 2 air-to-air kills he'd claimed during a chance encounter with FW-190s in September. The Pratt and Whitney R-2800 engine ran smooth. 2,800 horsepower pushing 7 tons of aircraft through cold December air. Oil temperature normal. Fuel sufficient. All 850s charged and ready. 2,000 pounds of high explosive hung beneath the wings. As the formation turned east toward the target area, Dalton performed his mental calculations. Altitude, 11,000 feet. Target elevation, approximately 800 feet. That gave him 10,200 feet of working space. If he rolled inverted and dove straight down at 70 degrees, he'd reach 550 miles per hour by 6,000 feet. If he held the dive through compressibility, he'd hit 580 by 4,000 feet. Bomb release at 2,500 feet would give him 1,700 feet of recovery margin. The math worked. The question was whether the P-47 would survive it, and whether he would. The target appeared at 0844 hours. 12 dark shapes crawling across snow-covered farmland 3 kilometers south of the town of Hoofelies. The formation leader called them out. Bandits 12 o'clock low. Panzers in column. Prepare for attack run. Dalton watched through his canopy as the German tanks moved in staggered formation. They weren't racing. They were advancing tactically, maintaining spacing, conserving fuel. They'd done this before. They knew American tactics. They expected attack from 4,000 feet, from angles that gave them time to respond. The formation leader began his dive. 60-degree angle. Speed building to 420 miles per hour. Professional. By the book. Dalton watched the lead Panzers react immediately. Black smoke erupted from their engines. Diesel exhaust mixed with discharge from smoke canisters. The column dispersed, vehicles accelerating in different directions. By the time the lead P-47 released its bombs, the Panzers had moved. The explosions cratered empty farmland 200 meters from a nearest tank. The second and third Thunderbolts dropped. More craters. No hits. Dalton broke formation. His wingman called out, confused. Hammer 3, you're breaking right. Copy. Taking a different angle. Stay high. He rolled inverted. Pulled back hard on the stick. The P-47's nose pointed straight at the earth. Not 60 degrees. Not 70. 90 degrees. Vertical. His altimeter unwound rapidly. 11,000. 10,000. 9,000. Airspeed 300 and climbing fast. The G-forces pushed him forward against his harness. Blood drained toward his head. The engine screamed. 450 miles per hour. The Panzers below grew larger. He could see individual vehicles now. Turrets traversing, searching for the threat they knew was coming from the usual angle. 500 miles per hour. The stick began to stiffen. He felt resistance building. Don't fight it. Let the physics happen. Trust the engineering. 550 miles per hour. 7,000 feet. Straight down. The controls locked solid. The trim tabs useless. His speed still building. The P-47 became a guided projectile. Newton's laws of motion, its only pilot. This was the edge. This was compressibility. This was the moment when most pilots pulled out, when doctrine said survival required altitude and caution. Jack Dalton kept diving. 575 miles per hour. 5,500 feet. The nearest Panzer filled his gun sight. The tank crew had no time to react. They'd been watching for attacks from standard angles. Nobody dove vertically at 575 miles per hour. It was suicidal. It was prohibited. It was impossible. Dalton's thumb hovered over the bomb release. 4,000 feet. 3,500. The geometry locked. Time dilated. He could see the tank commander's hatch, the exhaust stacks, the individual road wheels. At 3,000 feet, traveling at 590 miles per hour, Dalton pressed the release. 2,000-pound bombs separated cleanly from their wing shackles. Their forward velocity matched his diving speed. They fell straight as rifle bullets, air resistance negligible at that angle and speed. He felt the P-47 lurch upward as 2 tons of ordnance detached. Then came the critical moment. Recovery. He pulled back on the stick. Still frozen. No response. 7 Gs on the airframe. The earth rushing up. 2,500 feet. 2000. The edge of disaster. Then, as the speed decreased through 540 miles per hour, the controls unlocked. Control authority returned like a switch being thrown. He pulled back harder, using both hands. The P-47's massive wing bit into the air. The nose began to rise. The horizon appeared above his canopy. Blood drained from his head toward his legs. Blackness crept into his peripheral vision. 1,700 feet. Level flight impossible. Still diving, but shallowing now. 1,000 feet. The G-forces peaked at 8. His vision tunneled to a pinpoint. He pulled harder, every muscle straining. The R-2800 engine howling. 600 feet. The nose came up past horizon. 300 feet. He was climbing now, barely, trading excess speed for altitude. His vision cleared. 200 feet above the snow-covered forest. Then 400. Then 600. Behind him, 2,000-pound bombs struck within 3 meters of the lead Panzer. The explosive force lifted the 30-ton vehicle off its tracks. The turret separated from the hull. Secondary explosions as ammunition cooked off. Flame and black smoke erupted. Dalton leveled at 1,000 feet, shaking. His hands trembled on the stick. But he was alive. The P-47 was flying. And behind him, a German Panzer was burning. 1 down, 11 to go, and 8 minutes of combat time remaining before fuel and ammunition dictated withdrawal. What happened next would depend on whether doctrine or desperation determined American tactics for the rest of the war. Dalton climbed back to 8,000 feet, his breathing ragged inside the oxygen mask. His flight leader's voice crackled through the radio, sharp with confusion and anger. Hammer 3, what the hell was that? You broke formation. You exceeded. 1 Panzer destroyed lead. Confirmed kill. Direct hit. Silence on the radio. 3 seconds that felt like minutes. Then, say again your attack profile. Vertical dive from 11,000. Bomb release at 3,000. Target had 0 time to evade. More silence. Dalton could imagine the flight leader's expression. Shock. Concern. Maybe anger at the violation of doctrine. But also recognition. 1 confirmed kill. The first of the mission. The first real damage inflicted on the German column. Below, the remaining 11 Panzers had stopped their dispersal. Smoke still poured from their engines, but they'd ceased lateral movement. Their crews were processing what they'd just witnessed. An American fighter had attacked from an angle doctrine said was impossible. One of their own was burning. The German tank crews faced a calculation. Continue with tactical dispersal, which worked against conventional attacks. Or button up and attempt to reach cover before another vertical dive materialized. They chose wrong. They held position, maintaining smoke screen, waiting for the next wave of P-47s to attack from 4,000 feet at predictable angles. They've been fighting Americans for 6 months. They knew the patterns. One suicidal pilot didn't change doctrine. Dalton's wingman, Second Lieutenant Robert Tiny Henderson, pulled alongside. His voice came through the radio, quieter than the flight leaders. Hammer 3, I saw your dive. You locked up at 5,000, didn't you? Affirmative. Recovered at 1,700 feet. Jesus Christ, Jack. 1,700 feet. The math works if you don't panic. The P-47 unlocks itself below 540. You just have to hold the dive through the lockup. And if it doesn't unlock, Dalton didn't answer immediately. The honest response was, you die. The controls stay frozen. The Earth keeps approaching, and physics wins. But Henderson already knew that. Every P-47 pilot knew that. It unlocks, Dalton said simply. Republic over-engineered this bird. She's tougher than the manual admits. The flight leader's voice cut back in. All Hammer flights, form on me. We're making another pass. Standard doctrine. For 1,000 feet, release. Dalton keyed his mic. Lead, request permission to repeat vertical attack profile. I can hit 2 more before Winchester. Negative, Hammer 3. That dive pattern is not authorized. You got lucky once. You follow procedures now. Lucky. The word stung. But Dalton understood the position. Flight leaders were responsible for their pilots. Keeping them alive meant enforcing rules even rules that might be wrong. Especially rules written by test pilots and engineers who'd studied the problems longer than any combat pilot. Except those test pilots have been exploring limits in control conditions. They weren't dodging flak. They weren't watching American infantry die because Panzers kept advancing. They weren't calculating survival in terms of how many enemy tanks reached the front line. Dalton made his decision for the second time that morning. He clicked his mic twice. Acknowledgement without words. Then he broke formation again, rolling left and climbing to 12,000 feet. His wingman followed. Henderson's voice, "Jack, what are we doing?" "Physics experiment, Tiny. You stay at 10,000. Watch what happens. If I don't pull out, you tell them the dive angle was 90 degrees and the lockup happened at 5,000. Maybe someone smarter than me can figure out why." "You're insane." "Probably. But those Panzers are heading for Bastogne. Our guys in the 101st don't have anti-tank weapons that can penetrate a Panzer IV's frontal armor. They're going to die if we don't stop these tanks." Henderson didn't respond. He didn't need to. They both knew the stakes. The Battle of the Bulge wasn't just another mission. It was desperation warfare. The Germans had committed everything to this offensive. If they broke through, if they reached Antwerp, the war could extend into 1946. More months of combat. More casualties. More death. Dalton reached 12,000 feet and scanned the ground. The German column had resumed movement, clearly assuming the American attack was over. Standard 9th Air Force doctrine: one pass, drop ordnance, strafe if conditions allow, withdraw to rearm. The Panzers knew this. They'd resumed their advance toward the American lines. He selected his next target, the third tank in the column, a Panzer IV Wasp H identifiable by its squared cupola and long-barreled 75mm gun. The tank was moving at approximately 35 kilometers per hour across open farmland, following a farm track that led west toward Bastogne. Dalton rolled inverted, pulled the stick, committed. The P-47's nose dropped through horizon, through vertical, pointing straight down at the moving target below. The altimeter unwound. 12,000, 11,000, 10,000. This dive was different from a first. He understood the sequence now. The speed build-up, the control stiffening, the moment of lockup, the recovery threshold. He'd mapped the terrain. He knew where the edges were. 450 miles per hour, 9,000 feet. The Panzer was moving right to left across his sight picture. He adjusted his dive angle slightly. Not with stick input. The controls were already stiffening, but with rudder. The P-47's massive vertical stabilizer still had authority. He could yaw the entire aircraft, walking the sight picture across the target's movement path. 500 miles per hour, 7,000 feet. The tank below looked like a toy model. Dark gray against white snow. Tiny puffs of diesel exhaust. Turret rotating, searching the sky at conventional attack angles. 550 miles per hour, 5,500 feet. Lockup. The stick froze solid. The P-47 became a ballistic object. Dalton's hands gripped the useless control column, not fighting it, just holding position, waiting for the physics to reverse. 580 miles per hour, 4,000 feet. The tank filled his gun sight. He could see the commander's cupola, the machine gun mount, the Scherzen armor plates protecting the tracks. Details that would be invisible from a 4,000-foot shallow dive. 3,200 feet. Bomb release. 2,000-pound bombs separated. Their trajectory was nearly vertical. No arcing fall. Almost a straight drop at terminal velocity plus the P-47's diving speed. Combined velocity. Over 600 miles per hour. Dalton pulled back on the frozen stick. 2,800 feet. 2,500. The controls remained locked. His vision began to tunnel. The forest below resolved into individual trees. 2,000 feet. Control authority returned. He pulled with both hands, arm muscles burning. The G-forces hit like a wall. 8 GS. His G-suit inflated, squeezing his legs and abdomen, fighting to keep blood in his brain. The world dimmed to a gray tunnel. 1,500 feet. The P-47's nose rose past horizontal. 1,000 feet. Still diving, but shallowing. 500 feet. He was level now, screaming over the forest canopy at 400 miles per hour. Trees blurred past his wingtips. Behind him, 2 bombs struck within 5 meters of the moving Panzer IV. The first bomb hit the ground directly ahead of the tank. The explosion cratered the frozen earth, creating a depression 3 meters deep. The Panzer's front slope dropped into the crater. The second bomb struck the tank's engine deck as it tipped forward. The explosion severed the transmission, shattered the engine mounts, and detonated stored ammunition in the hull. The Panzer IV exploded from within. The turret lifted off its race ring, tumbling through the air before crashing down 50 meters away. Flames erupted from every hatch. Secondary explosions continued for 30 seconds as 75mm rounds cooked off in sequence. 2 down, 10 remaining. Dalton climbed back to altitude, his arms shaking from exertion and adrenaline. His fuel gauge showed 65% remaining. Ammunition counters, 50 caliber at 80%. He had ordnance for one more diving attack if he could find bombs. But both his wing-mounted stores were expended. His wingman's voice, "Jack, I saw the hit. Direct kill. How are you pulling out at that altitude? Timing tiny. You pull the instant you feel control return. Not before, not after. The second you get elevator authority back. And if you pull before, nothing happens. Controls are still locked. You waste time. And if you pull after, you hit the ground at 500 miles per hour." Henderson went quiet again. Then, the rest of the squadron is Winchester. They're heading home. Flight leader wants us back at base. He's pretty mad. Dalton checked his fuel. Enough for 15 minutes over the target area. His bombs were gone, but he still had 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. 8 M2 Brownings firing in unison produced 110 rounds per second. Against a Panzer side or rear armor, 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds could penetrate thin plates, damage external equipment, destroy tracks, kill exposed crew. Tiny, you head back. Tell them I'm following in 10 minutes. I'm going to strafe the column, see if I can mobility kill a few more. Jack, the flight leader ordered. I know what he ordered. I'll deal with it when I land. Right now, those Panzers are still moving toward our lines. I've got ammunition and fuel. I'm using both. You're going to get court-martialed. Maybe. But if I stop these tanks, the 101st might survive another day. That's worth a court-martial. Henderson paused. Then, all right. But I'm staying. You're not doing this alone. 2 P-47s stand a better chance than 1. Tiny, you don't have to. Shut up, Jack. We're a flight. We stick together. What's the plan? Dalton felt relief flood through him. Having a wingman changed everything. 2 aircraft could coordinate, cover each other, divide defensive fire. His chances of surviving the next 8 minutes had just doubled. All right, here's what we're doing. I'm going to make another vertical dive, but this time without bombs. I'll use guns only, targeting the lead Panzer. 50 caliber AP rounds into the engine deck and tracks. You stay at 8,000, watch for flak, and strafe anything that shoots at me. Copy. What's your dive profile? Same as before. 90-degree vertical from 12,000. Gun run from 3,000 to 1,000 feet. I'll be locked in compressibility for most of it, so I can't maneuver. You'll need to suppress any flak that opens up. Understood. What about recovery altitude? 1,700 feet, if I'm lucky. Less if I'm not. Jesus. Yeah. Dalton climbed to 12,000 feet for the 3rd time. Below, the Panzer column had slowed again. 2 burning wrecks littered their route. The German tank commanders were reconsidering their tactical situation. They'd lost 2 vehicles in minutes to a diving attack pattern they'd never encountered. Their doctrine had no counter for vertical dives. Their training had never addressed this scenario. Some crews began abandoning the formation, turning off the main route toward tree cover. Others held course, trusting their armor and anti-aircraft machine guns. The column fractured into individuals, each commander making survival calculations based on incomplete information. Dalton selected the lead remaining Panzer, now isolated from its companions by 400 meters. The tank was approaching a small crossroads where two farm tracks intersected. Open ground. No cover. Perfect target. He rolled inverted for the third time. Pulled back. The familiar sequence began. Airspeed building. Controls stiffening. The Earth rotating into view above his canopy as he dove straight down. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. 12,000 feet. The Panzer below was moving, but slowly now. Cautious. The crew had seen what happened to the previous two targets. They were scanning the sky, looking for the threat. 450 miles per hour. 9,000 feet. The tank commander spotted him. Dalton saw the cupola hatch swing open, saw the commander lean out, pointing upward. The tank's turret began traversing, the 75mm main gun elevating to maximum angle. A useless gesture. Tank cannons couldn't engage aircraft diving from directly overhead. But the hull-mounted MG-34 machine gun could. Dalton saw tracer fire begin streaming upward. Green points of light rising toward him. The German gunner was firing ballistically, hoping to walk rounds into Dalton's flight path. At these speeds and angles, hitting a diving aircraft required extraordinary luck. The Germans got lucky. At 7,000 feet, traveling at 530 miles per hour, 3 7.92mm rounds struck Dalton's P-47. One hit the left wing root, punching through aluminum skin and missing hydraulic lines by centimeters. The second struck the engine cowling, ricocheting off the R-2800's cooling baffles. The third hit the canopy frame directly above Dalton's head. It didn't penetrate. The armored steel frame deflected it. But the impact was loud enough to hear over the engine roar. Dalton flinched involuntarily. His hands tightened on the frozen stick. The P-47 continued its dive, unaffected by 3 rifle-caliber hits. The aircraft was designed to absorb punishment. Small arms fire was annoying, not fatal. 5,500 feet. Full compressibility lockup. His speed topped 565 miles per hour. The Panzer filled his gun sight. His thumb settled on the gun trigger. Not yet. Too far. 50 caliber rounds were devastating at close range, but lost effectiveness beyond 800 meters. He needed to get closer. For 1,000 feet. The Panzer's commander ducked back inside the turret, slamming the hatch. The crew knew what was coming. They couldn't evade. They couldn't effectively return fire. They could only button up and hope American gunnery was poor. 3,500 feet. Dalton pressed the trigger. All 8 M2 Brownings opened fire simultaneously. The P-47 shuddered from recoil. Tracers streamed downward in a tight cone, every 5th round visible as a red streak against the white snow. 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds struck the Panzer's engine deck at a nearly vertical angle. This was the tank's weakest armor. Only 16 millimeters of rolled steel protected the engine compartment from above. The M2 round could penetrate 20 millimeters at optimal angles. Dalton held the trigger down. 3,000 feet. 2,800. 20 rounds per gun per second. 160 rounds per second combined. The P-47's ammunition supply was depleting rapidly, but the effect on the target was catastrophic. Armor-piercing rounds punched through the engine deck. Some struck the Maybach HL-120 engine directly, shattering cylinder heads and igniting leaked fuel. Others penetrated into the crew compartment. One round struck the stored 75mm ammunition, but failed to detonate it. Another severed the turret traverse hydraulic line. Pressurized fluid sprayed across hot engine components. 2,500 feet. Dalton released the trigger. He'd fired for 2.5 seconds. 400 rounds expended. The controls remained frozen. His speed was 575 miles per hour and climbing. The laws of physics had him trapped. 2,000 feet. Control authority began returning. He pulled back gradually, feeling for the edge of control. Too gentle, and he'd hit the ground. Too aggressive, and he'd overstressed the airframe at these speeds. 1,800 feet. The nose rose past horizontal. 1,800 pounds of force on the stick. His G-suit fully inflated. Vision narrowing to a pinpoint. The forest below rushed past at 350 miles per hour. 900 feet. Level flight. His vision cleared. He was alive. The P-47 was flying. Behind him, the Panzer had stopped moving. Smoke poured from the engine compartment. The tracks were stationary. Mobility kill confirmed. 3 down, 9 remaining. But Dalton was out of bombs. His 50 caliber ammunition was at 60%, fuel at 50%, and his flight leader was going to have him grounded when he returned to base. Unless he could prove the tactic worked so decisively that doctrine had to change. Henderson's voice, Hammer 3, I've got movement on your 6. Flak opening up. Brake left. Dalton rolled hard left, pulling Gs that tested the damaged canopy frame. Tracer fire streaked past his right wing. German mobile flak, probably a flak-Vierling 38 for 20mm cannons mounted on a half-track. The Germans had positioned anti-aircraft assets with their armor. Smart doctrine. American fighter bombers were the biggest threat to Panzer formations. Henderson dove on the flak position, his 850s hammering. The flak-Vierling crew scattered. 2 men fell. The half-track caught fire. Good kill, Tiny. Thanks for the save. Don't mention it. What's next? Dalton checked his instruments. Fuel, 48%. Ammunition, 58%. Time over target. 3 minutes remaining before he'd have to break for home to maintain fuel reserves. 3 minutes. 9 German Panzers still advancing toward American lines. He could make 2 more gun runs. Maybe mobility kill 2 more tanks. That would leave 7 operational vehicles to reach the front line. Not good enough. The 101st was outnumbered, undersupplied, and surrounded. Every Panzer that reached Bastogne meant more dead paratroopers. 7 tanks could devastate defensive positions, destroy supply depots, break the perimeter. Dalton needed a different approach. He scanned the terrain below. The Panzer column had scattered completely now. Individual tanks were heading for cover, woodlines, villages, anywhere that might provide protection from vertical diving attacks. But they were still advancing west, still moving toward American positions. They hadn't broken off or retreated. German doctrine emphasized aggressive action. These crews were following orders despite losses. Dalton spotted an opportunity. 6 of the remaining 9 Panzers were converging on a small village, Behane, according to his map. Stone buildings, narrow streets. The Germans were seeking cover from air attack in urban terrain where diving attacks would risk hitting civilian structures. Smart tactically, but it created a bottleneck. 6 tanks entering a village meant limited maneuver space. They'd be moving slowly, negotiating turns, presenting side and rear armor. Perfect targets for low-level strafing runs. Tiny, you see the 6 Panzers heading for that village? Copy. Looks like they're going to ground. That's what they think. But they're about to bunch up in confined space. I'm going in on the deck. Strafe run through the main street. You follow 30-second behind. We catch them in the village. We can mobility kill at least 4. Jack, low-level strafing in a village? What about the dive attacks? Out of bombs. Out of altitude advantage. We adapt. The civilians know there's a war on. This is going to get loud and dangerous. But if we don't stop these tanks here, they'll reach Bastogne by nightfall. Our choice. Risk civilian casualties in an empty village or guarantee military casualties at the American perimeter. Henderson didn't respond immediately. The moral calculation was brutal, but was also reality. War made these demands. Commanders made these choices. Pilots executed the decisions. All right, Henderson said finally. I'm with you. But we go fast and we get out fast. No loitering. Agreed. Descending now. Dalton pushed the stick forward, diving from 8,000 feet to 200 feet in a spiral descent that would have terrified any training instructor. He leveled off 50 feet above the treetops, screaming toward Behane at 320 miles per hour. The 6 Panzers were entering the village's outskirts. 2 had already navigated the main intersection. 4 more were approaching in column formation. Their crews felt safer here. Buildings provided cover from vertical dives. The Americans wouldn't dare strafe a village. They were wrong. Dalton lined up on the main street, threading between a church steeple on his left and a three-story building on his right. His wingtips cleared obstacles by less than 20 feet on each side. The Panzers appeared ahead, dark shapes against snow-covered cobblestones. Range, 600 meters. 500. 400. He pressed the trigger. All 8 M2 Brownings opened fire. Tracers converged on the nearest Panzer's rear deck. At this shallow angle, most rounds ricocheted off the armor. But some found weak points, vision ports, exhaust stacks, the thin armor protecting the radiator grills. 300 meters. The Panzer erupted in flames. Engine fire. The crew bailed out through the hatches, dropping to the street and running for cover. Dalton held the trigger down. 200 meters. The second Panzer was turning, trying to present its frontal armor. Too slow. 50 caliber rounds stitched across the tank's side, destroying the left track. The Panzer slewed sideways, immobilized. 100 meters. Dalton released the trigger and pulled up hard, climbing over the church steeple by 15 feet. Stone tiles scraped his belly. Metal on stone, sparks trailing behind him. He'd cut it closer than intended. But behind him, 2 more German Panzers were disabled. The villagers of Bahrain would remember December 22nd, 1944. The day an American pilot flew down their main street at 300 miles per hour, machine guns blazing, trading paint with medieval architecture. Henderson followed 30 seconds later, his guns hammering the remaining Panzers. One caught fire, another threw a track. The surviving tanks abandoned the village, retreating east toward German lines. Dalton climbed to 1,000 feet and took stock. His ammunition counters were nearly empty, 12% remaining, maybe 400 rounds across all guns. His fuel was at 38%, minimum for reaching home base. His canopy frame was cracked from the bullet impact. His belly showed scrapes from the church steeple. But below him, 5 German Panzers burned. 2 more were immobilized. The remaining 5 had broken off their attack and were retreating. The column that had threatened to break through to Bastogne was shattered. Elapsed time since first attack, 8 minutes, 40 seconds. 12 German Panzers had entered the Ardennes that morning. 7 were destroyed or disabled. 5 retreated. The 101st Airborne would hold Bastogne for another day. The Battle of the Bulge would turn on margins like this. Small victories by individual pilots who understood that doctrine was written by people who weren't being shot at. Dalton keyed his radio. "Tiny, let's go home." "Roger that." "Jack, you just violated about 15 regulations. Probably more, but I'm alive and those tanks are dead. I'll take that trade." They turned west toward Metz, leaving smoke and fire behind them. Dalton's hands finally stopped shaking. The adrenaline crash was beginning. He'd survived 3 compressibility dives, German machine gun fire, anti-aircraft flak, and collision with church architecture. His P-47 had absorbed punishment that would have destroyed any other aircraft. The flight back to A-92 took 23 minutes. Dalton landed at 0928 hours with fuel tanks nearly dry and ammunition boxes empty. As he taxied to the hardstand, he saw his squadron commander standing by the operations shack. Arms crossed, expression unreadable. Major Thomas Ridgway had commanded the 512th Fighter Squadron for 11 months. He'd seen pilots disobey orders, break formation, make stupid decisions born from inexperience or panic. But watching First Lieutenant Jack Dalton climb out of his battered P-47 Thunderbolt, Ridgway wasn't sure which category this fell into. Dalton's crew chief, Staff Sergeant Mike Kowalski, was already inspecting the damage. Bullet holes in the wing root, scrapes along the belly, a crack in the canopy frame that spiderwebbed across 6 inches of armored steel. Kowalski whistled low, running his hand along the church steeple damage. "Sir, you had a disagreement with French architecture?" "Disagreement implies negotiation. Ski. That church one." Ridgway approached as Dalton pulled off his flight helmet. "Lieutenant, my office." "Now." "Yes, sir." They walked across the frozen mud of advanced landing ground in 92 in silence. Other pilots watched from the ready room. Word had already spread. Dalton had broken doctrine. He'd survived. More importantly, he destroyed 7 Panzers in one mission. The mathematics of air-to-ground combat had suddenly changed. Inside the operations shack, Ridgway closed the door and pointed a chair. "Sit." Dalton sat. Ridgway remained standing, arms still crossed. His expression was carefully neutral. This was the face of a commander deciding whether to recommend a Medal of Honor or a court-martial. Possibly both. "Lieutenant, explain your actions. Start with why you ignored direct orders to maintain standard attack profiles." Dalton took a breath. He'd rehearsed this during the flight home. "Sir, standard doctrine wasn't working. The Panzers were dispersing during our shallow dives. Our hit rate was less than 10%. I calculated that a vertical dive would eliminate evasion time and dramatically increase accuracy." "You calculated?" "Yes, sir. Physics, sir. Speed, angle, time to target. And the compressibility lockup? The technical orders explicitly prohibit exceeding 500 miles per hour in dives, specifically because the controls freeze. You exceeded 590 on your third dive." "Yes, sir. But the P-47 recovers from compressibility if you understand the timing. The controls unlock below 540 miles per hour. I tested this at altitude before deploying the tactic in combat." Ridgway's eyebrow raised. "You tested extreme compressibility dives on your own?" "When?" 3 weeks ago, sir. I wanted to verify that Republic's safety margins were conservative." "Conservative? Lieutenant, those safety margins exist because test pilots died exploring those limits." "I know, sir. But test pilots explore limits in control conditions. We're fighting a war. Different risk calculations apply." Ridgway finally sat down. He pulled out a mission report form and a pencil. "Walk me through each attack. Precise details. Altitude, speed, angle, bomb release point, recovery altitude. Everything." For the next 30 minutes, Dalton provided technical specifications for each dive. Ridgway took notes, occasionally asking questions about control feel, G-forces, visual references during recovery. The Major's expression shifted from anger to calculation. He was analyzing data, not disciplining insubordination. Finally, Ridgway set down his pencil. 7 confirmed kills. 5 destroyed, 2 mobility kills. Your wingman confirms all 7. Gun camera footage will verify when photo reconnaissance processes the film." "Yes, sir. Standard doctrine got us 0 kills this morning. Every other P-47 in the squadron dropped ordnance. None hit moving targets. You got 7. The vertical dive eliminates evasion time, sir. The Germans can't scatter when the bombs arrive 5 seconds after dive initiation instead of 45 seconds. I understand the tactical advantage, Lieutenant. What I'm trying to determine is whether you're a genius or a maniac." "Can it be both, sir?" Ridgway almost smiled. "Almost. Here's the situation. You violated 3 technical orders. You broke formation without authorization. You performed maneuvers explicitly prohibited by Republic Aviation and endorsed by 9th Air Force Command. By regulation, I should ground you pending investigation." Dalton's stomach dropped. "Sir, Ridgway held up a hand. "I'm not finished. However, you also destroyed more enemy armor in 8 minutes than my entire squadron has destroyed in the past week. You proved that the P-47 can execute vertical dive bombing if the pilot understands the recovery procedure. And you potentially saved hundreds of American lives by stopping that Panzer column before it reached Bastogne." He leaned back in his chair. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm writing this up. Full after-action report with technical specifications. I'm sending it to 9 Tactical Air Command with a recommendation that your tactics be formally evaluated. If they determine this is reproducible and survivable, it could change how we employ P-47s against armor. And if they determine it's too dangerous, then you're grounded and possibly court-martialed for reckless endangerment. But given the current situation, Bastogne surrounded, Germans still pushing, I suspect they'll want more data before making that decision. Meaning you're flying tomorrow. Same mission profile, same target type, but this time, I'm assigning 2 aircraft to fly top cover with gun cameras specifically to document your dive profile. We need visual proof of your recovery altitudes and control inputs. Dalton felt relief and dread simultaneously. You want me to repeat the vertical dives? Under observation, I want the Air Force to understand whether you're pioneering a tactic or just postponing your funeral. Get some rest, Lieutenant. Briefing at 0600 tomorrow. Yes, sir. Dalton stood to leave. Ridgway's voice stopped him at the door. Lieutenant? Off the record. Sir, if you died on any of those dives, I would have written it up as pilot error and suicidal risk-taking. Since you survived and killed 7 Panzers, you might become the man who revolutionized close air support. The difference between hero and cautionary tale is about 1,700 feet of altitude and a lot of luck. I'll remember that, sir. See that you do. Word of Dalton's mission spread through 9 Tactical Air Command within hours. By evening, 3 colonels from 9th Air Force Headquarters had arrived at A92 to interview him. They brought technical experts from Republic Aviation, combat analysts from the Ground Forces Board, and intelligence officers who specialized in armor doctrine. The interrogation was exhaustive. They wanted altitude readings at 500-foot intervals, control surface deflections during compressibility, visual references used for recovery timing, G-force estimates, fuel consumption rates during vertical dives, ammunition expenditure per target, psychological stress factors. Dalton answered every question. He drew diagrams on a briefing board showing dive angles and recovery profiles. He explained the physics of compressibility lockup and the timing required for safe recovery. He detailed how the P-47's rugged airframe could survive forces that would destroy lighter aircraft. One of the Republic Aviation engineers, a civilian named Robert Walsh, was particularly interested in recovery altitudes. Lieutenant, you said you pulled out at 1,700 feet on your first dive. That's less than half the altitude specified in our technical orders. How did you determine that was safe? I didn't, sir. Not in advance. I calculated that if the controls unlocked below 540 miles per hour, and I was descending at approximately 150 feet per second at that speed, I need about 1,200 feet minimum for recovery at 8 Gs. I added a 500-foot safety margin and hoped the math was correct. Hoped. Combat doesn't allow for test programs, sir. You make your best calculation and execute. The P-47 proved more capable than your documentation suggested. Walsh exchanged glances with the Air Force colonels. Lieutenant, Republic designed the P-47 to survive compressibility. We tested it extensively, but our documentation reflects the worst-case scenarios we encountered during testing. We added safety margins to protect pilots from unpredictable conditions, turbulence, damaged aircraft, pilot error under stress. I understand, sir, but those safety margins were preventing effective employment of the aircraft against German armor. Sometimes the safer option is to take calculated risks. One of the colonels, a lean man named Peterson who commanded the 404th Fighter Group, spoke up. Lieutenant, if we formally adopt your tactics, we'll need to train pilots in the recovery procedure. That means instructors, practice aircraft, possibly casualties during training. How confident are you that average pilots can execute this safely? Dalton considered carefully. This was the critical question. His technique might work for experienced pilots who understood their aircraft intimately. But the Air Force needed tactics that worked for replacement pilots with minimal combat time. Men who'd logged 50 hours in P-47s and were being thrown into combat because the demand for pilots exceeded the supply of veterans. Sir, I don't think every pilot can do this. It requires feel for the aircraft, understanding of compressibility physics, and the discipline to not panic when controls lock. But I think experienced pilots, men with 20 or more combat missions, can learn the technique with proper instruction. How many practice dives before they're combat ready? 3 at minimum, sir. 1 to experience compressibility lockup. 1 to practice recovery timing. 1 to simulate combat conditions with a mock target. After that, they either have the feel for it or they don't. Colonel Peterson nodded slowly. 3 practice dives. 3 opportunities for a pilot to misjudge and auger in. That's acceptable given the potential return on investment. We're losing pilots to flak anyway. If this tactic increases tank kills significantly, the risk may be worthwhile. The meeting continued for another hour. They discussed training protocols, technical modifications to improve safety, optimal target types, and tactical integration with existing doctrine. By the end, consensus emerged. Dalton's vertical dive bombing technique would be evaluated through a formal test program. If results prove consistent, it would be disseminated through 9th Air Force tactical bulletins. But first, they needed more data, which meant Dalton would fly again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until either the technique was validated or he died, proving it was too dangerous. December 23, 1944, 0715 hours. 8 P-47s lifted off from A-92. Dalton flew lead position this time, his wingman Henderson on his right, 2 aircraft with high-resolution gun cameras flying top cover at 15,000 feet. Their mission: locate and destroy German armor advancing toward Allied lines south of Bastogne. The weather had deteriorated overnight. Cloud ceiling at 4,000 feet. Visibility 3 miles in snow flurries. Marginal flying conditions. But German Panzers were still moving, weather notwithstanding. The Battle of the Bulge continued regardless of pilot comfort. They found targets at 0803. 9 Panther tanks moving in column along a farm road. Panthers were heavier than Panzer IVs, 45 tons versus 32, with thicker armor and more powerful guns. Harder targets. Better test of the vertical dive tactic. Dalton climbed to 13,000 feet and rolled inverted. This time, he narrated the dive over the radio for the benefit of the camera aircraft and the analysts who would review the footage. Beginning dive. Altitude 13,000. Speed 220, increasing. Nose straight down, angle 90 degrees. Target is lead Panther, moving west at approximately 30 kilometers per hour. The familiar sequence began. Speed building. Controls stiffening. The physics taking over. Passing 9,000. Speed 470. Controls beginning to stiffen. Target tracking centered. 7,000 feet. Full compressibility. His voice remained calm, clinical. Lockup at 5,500. Speed 565. Controls completely frozen. Unable to maneuver. Continuing dive on ballistic trajectory. For 1,000 feet. The Panther below filled his sight. Passing 4,000. Speed 585. Preparing for bomb release. 3,000 feet. He pressed the release. 2,000-pound bombs dropped. Bombs away. 3,000 feet. Speed 590. Beginning recovery procedure. 2,500 feet. He pulled back on a frozen stick. Waiting. Trusting the physics. Controls still locked. 2,000 feet. Maintaining pull pressure. 1,800 feet. The stick came alive. Control authority returning. Pulling. 7 Gs. 1,500 feet. 1,000 feet. Level flight. Recovery complete. Altitude 1,000 feet. Speed 380 and decreasing. Behind him, both bombs struck within 2 meters of the Panther. The tank's turret separated from the hull. Secondary explosions rippled through the armor. Kill confirmed. He climbed back to altitude and repeated the process. 9 Panthers total. 4 destroyed with bombs. 3 mobility killed with gun runs. 2 escaped in a heavy forest where diving attacks were impossible. Total time, 11 minutes. 7 confirmed kills. Camera aircraft documented every dive, every recovery, every altitude reading. The data would be analyzed by engineers, taught to instructors, incorporated into doctrine. Or it would prove Jack Dalton had been extraordinarily lucky and no pilot should attempt to replicate his tactics. The test program continued through late December and into January 1945. 12 experienced P-47 pilots were selected to learn the vertical dive technique. They practiced at altitude, diving from 20,000 feet in empty air, learning to feel the compressibility threshold and trust the recovery timing. 3 pilots washed out. They could execute the dive but panicked during lockup fighting the controls instead of waiting for recovery. Their fear was rational. Every instinct screamed that frozen controls meant death. Overcoming that instinct required a specific personality type, not fearless, but able to trust engineering and physics over emotion. 9 pilots completed training. They deployed the tactic in combat between January 2nd and January 15th, 1945. Combined results: 43 German tanks destroyed or mobility killed. 2 pilots killed when they misjudged recovery altitude. 1 badly injured during a high-G recovery that caused spinal compression fractures. The loss rate was 22%, far higher than conventional dive bombing, which rarely exceeded 5% pilot losses per mission. But the kill rate was 7 times higher. The mathematics were brutal but clear. More pilots died, but many more German tanks were destroyed. On January 18, 1945, 9th Air Force issued Tactical Bulletin 45-3, employment of P-47 aircraft in vertical dive bombing against armored targets. The 6-page document detailed Dalton's technique, specified training requirements, and emphasized that the tactic was optional. Squadron commanders could authorize its use, but could not require pilots to employ it. The risks were clearly documented. The potential benefits were equally clear. By war's end, an estimated 200 P-47 pilots had employed vertical dive bombing tactics. They accounted for over 500 German tanks destroyed in the final 4 months of fighting. The technique proved particularly effective during the Rhine crossings in March, when German Panther and Tiger tanks attempted to destroy Allied bridgeheads. P-47s diving vertically through heavy, flak destroyed armor that conventional attacks couldn't touch. But the cost was significant. 41 pilots died in vertical diving accidents. Another 16 suffered serious injuries. The tactic worked, but it extracted a price measured in American lives. Jack Dalton survived the war. He flew 73 combat missions, was credited with 11 tank kills, and received the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions on December 22, 1944. His citation read, "For extraordinary achievement in aerial flight while serving as a fighter pilot." First Lieutenant Dalton, with complete disregard for his personal safety, pioneered innovative dive bombing tactics that significantly increased the effectiveness of fighter-bomber operations against enemy armored formations. His courage and technical skill contributed directly to the successful defense of Allied positions during critical phases of the Battle of the Bulge. He never liked the citation. He felt it made him sound heroic when he'd simply been doing mathematics. The vertical dive wasn't courage. It was physics applied under pressure. The P-47 was capable of the maneuver. He'd simply been willing to test whether the safety margins were accurate. After the war, Dalton returned to Abilene, Texas. He married his girlfriend, Helen, in July 1946. They had 3 children. He ran a farm equipment repair business, working on tractors and combines, understanding machines the way he'd understood the P-47. He rarely spoke about the war, except to say he'd been lucky and his airplane had been tough. He died in 1998 at age 79. At his funeral, 3 elderly men in Air Force uniforms appeared. Former P-47 pilots who'd learned the vertical dive technique. They'd flown together in January 1945, employing Dalton's tactics against German tanks during the final Wehrmacht counteroffensives. One of them, retired Colonel Robert Henderson, Dalton's wingman, Tiny, gave a brief eulogy. He told the assembled mourners about December 22, 1944, about watching his friend dive vertically at a speed that should have killed him, about seeing 12 German tanks burning across 8 minutes of combat, about understanding that sometimes survival requires breaking rules written by people who aren't being shot at. Jack never thought he was special, Henderson said. He thought he'd figured out some math and flown his airplane the way it was built to be flown. He was wrong about that. Not every pilot could do what he did. Not everyone had the nerve to hold a dive through compressibility lockup. Not everyone could trust engineering over instinct when the ground was rushing up at 500 miles per hour. Henderson paused, looking at the flag-draped coffin. But he was right about one thing. The P-47 was tougher than the manual admitted. And sometimes the safest thing you can do is take a calculated risk. Because the alternative, following doctrine that doesn't work, gets more people killed. The post-war analysis conducted by Air Force Historical Research Division in 1952 examined the effectiveness of vertical dive bombing tactics in the European theater. Their conclusions were nuanced. Statistically, vertical dive bombing increased tank kill rates from 7% to 43% per sortie. An individual P-47 employing the tactic was 6 times more likely to destroy its target than an aircraft using conventional dive angles. However, pilot attrition rates were 4 times higher. The technique was extraordinarily dangerous. It required specific conditions: clear weather, sufficient altitude, experienced pilots, and targets in open terrain. It couldn't be employed universally. Most significantly, the tactic was only effective because German tank doctrine hadn't adapted quickly enough. By war's end, German armored formations had begun employing dedicated anti-aircraft battalions specifically to counter vertical diving attacks. Had the war continued, the technique's effectiveness would likely have declined as countermeasures improved. But in the crucial months of December 1944 through March 1945, when the outcome of the war hung on narrow margins, vertical dive bombing proved decisive. It destroyed hundreds of German tanks during the Battle of the Bulge. It protected Rhine River crossings. It demonstrated that American pilots could innovate under pressure, adapting tactics to meet battlefield realities. The legacy extended beyond World War II. When the Air Force developed close air support doctrine for Korea and Vietnam, lessons from vertical dive bombing informed training programs. Pilots learned that aircraft capabilities often exceeded published limitations, that emergency situations sometimes required exceeding safety margins, that the difference between doctrine and survival might be measured in split-second decisions made at the edge of controllability. Modern fighter-bomber pilots flying 10 Warthogs, F-16s, and F-35 still study the P-47 vertical dive tactic. Not because they'll replicate it. Modern precision-guided weapons eliminate the need for suicidal dive angles, but because it teaches a fundamental truth about air-ground combat. Effectiveness requires understanding your machine's true capabilities, not just its documented limitations. The P-47 Thunderbolt was designed as a high-altitude escort fighter. It became a devastating ground attack aircraft. Its rugged airframe could survive punishment that destroyed other fighters. Its powerful engine provided performance margins that pilots learned to exploit. But its greatest capability was discovered by one lieutenant who refused to accept that doctrine was immutable, who calculated that sometimes the manual was wrong, who understood that 1,700 feet of altitude was enough if you trusted the physics and didn't panic. 12 German Panzers advancing toward Bastogne. 8 minutes of combat. 7 destroyed or disabled. 5 retreating. The mathematics were simple. The execution was anything but. Jack Dalton proved that the P-47 could do more than Republic Aviation believed, more than 9th Air Force doctrine allowed, more than conventional wisdom suggested. He proved it by diving straight down at speeds that locked his controls, trusting that engineering would overcome panic, that the aircraft would recover if the pilot held his nerve. The forbidden dive wasn't suicidal. It was calculated. It was repeatable. It was deadly effective. And it required only 3 things: understanding physics, trusting your machine, and accepting that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is follow the rules. War is rarely won by the side with the best equipment. It's won by the side that best understands how to employ what it has. The Germans built superior tanks, Tigers, Panthers, weapons that outclassed anything the Allies fielded. They developed tactics that exploited those advantages. They trained crews to execute with mechanical precision. And for 18 months, it worked. German armor dominated. American tank destroyers and fighter bombers struggled to achieve kills. Doctrine set attack from 4,000 feet at 60-degree angles. The Panzers scattered. The bombs missed. The war continued. Then one pilot decided the doctrine was killing more Americans than it was saving. He calculated a different approach. He tested it. He proved it worked. He taught it to others. And hundreds of German tanks burned because one lieutenant understood that safety margins, while well-intentioned, sometimes prevent victory. The P-47 Thunderbolt earned many nicknames. The Jug, the Beast, the Iron Monster. But to the men who flew vertical dives, who pushed past compressibility lockup and recovered at altitudes that made ground crews faint, it was simply the machine that kept them alive when they broke every rule designed to do the same. Sometimes doctrine is more dangerous than the enemy. Sometimes the manual is wrong. Sometimes survival requires diving straight down at 600 miles per hour and trusting that physics will save you when human instinct screams run. December 22nd, 1944. 12 Panzers. 8 minutes. One pilot who understood his airplane better than the people who built it. The forbidden dive became standard doctrine. The suicidal tactic became survival. The rules were rewritten because one man proved they were wrong. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.